Imagine the coldest night you've ever known, then subtract the comforts that make it survivable. No humming radiator, no sealed windows, no pantry door with its cheerful click. Outside, snow stacks against a crooked wooden door, like a slow-moving glacier. Inside, a hearth breathes its thin orange into a room that never quite warms. The rafters are smoke-glossed. A draught finds every seam in the thatch. A child's breath fogs, then vanishes. Someone stirs a pot that is more hope than supper. Hunger, here, isn't a number of calories. It's a pressure in the skull. It's the shiver behind the ribs. It's counting the turnips in your head, while telling your hands not to count the turnips in the bin. It rewrites time, too. Minutes stretch. Nights become geography. In this world, survival is not a weekend experiment or a television plot. It is the arithmetic of life performed daily, with no eraser on a slate that remembers every mistake. We tend to think of the Middle Ages as a long grey corridor of scarcity, but that's a cartoon. Medieval people were ingenious, stubborn, and observant to a degree that shames our amnesia. Their genius did not wear lab coats, it wore wool. It squinted at the sky, took notes in muscle memory, and hoarded every lesson a season could teach. Yes, winters bit hard enough to leave a bruise on history, but families learned to push back with methods so elegant, so systematic, that modern food science has spent a century relearning them with clipboards. Before we open their toolkit, we need to stand where they stood, on the thin ledge between enough and not enough. The best illustration is the Great Famine of 1317, a calamity made of rain. For months that turned into years, clouds sat on the fields of northern Europe like a bad idea and did not move. Grain plants took water the way a drowning man takes air. Hay blackened where it lay. Animals starved in slow motion. Salt white gold, the keystone of preservation, couldn't be made in adequate quantities because the air refused to cooperate. Prices went wild. Accounts from the time read like the bad dreams of careful men. Seed grain eaten, debts chained to futures that never arrived, children carried to monasteries with the quiet hope that someone there might find a miracle. This wasn't an anomaly so much as a loud reminder of a quieter rule. Margins were thin, and the weather kept the pen. Here's the truth that shaped medieval life more than any royal decree. You could not afford to be wrong about food. A preservation method that worked most of the time was a way of saying, some winters we bury our neighbours. So an ethic emerged, part chemistry, part engineering, part social contract. You don't rely on one thing. You build a web of things. You don't count a single harvest. You count the year as an orchestra of tasks, with each instrument entering at the right bar. You don't hoard knowledge in one head. You braid it into community so that old women, millers, brewers, herdsmen, and midwives each hold a piece of the map. This series is the Map 50 techniques braided into 10 chapters, each a thread in a net strong enough to catch a winter. We will talk about salt that forbids rot, smoke that patrols the invisible borders of meat, cellars that use the earth's patience to moderate temperature, and fermentation, the sacred trick of inviting the good microbes to colonize a food before the villains can. We will talk about fats that seal, sugars that stabilize, calendars that choreograph, and rites and rituals that translate compassion into calories, and we will not sentimentalize any of it. These systems were born where theory goes to die, in the cold, with mouths to feed. But there's a second truth, and it feels almost indecent to say in a modern kitchen. Our ancestors were gourmets of necessity. Long cures and slow ferments produce flavors with depth. Meat that takes months to transform becomes a study in patience. Cabbage turned by friendly bacteria grows complex as an old violin. What began as life insurance ended up, very often, as a cuisine. When survival techniques work beautifully, they stop looking like techniques, they look like culture. Pause with me, just for a breath. If any part of this opens a door in your imagination, if you can taste the brine or hear the quiet drip of a cellar wall, give yourself that moment. A little stillness makes room for understanding. Then, we'll keep going. The first discipline is perspective. Stand inside a peasant year and the logic clarifies. Spring is a bright urgency. Plant before the soil changes its mind. Nurse animals through the precarious edge of birth. Start the ferments that prefer cool temperatures but longer daylight. Summer is abundance and forethought. Dry what the sun will help dry. Smoke what the flies would ruin. Rotate tasks so that heat does not become a vandal. Autumn is a controlled sprint. Slaughter when the air turns your ally. Render fat when effort becomes efficiency. Stack wood like you're laying down time itself. Winter is accounting and restraint. Eat what feeds tomorrow. Rotate stores so the cellar breathes properly. Repair, sharpen, plan. The second discipline is redundancy. Nothing is trusted alone. Meat is salted and smoked, and sometimes dried. Vegetables are cellared and sand-stored and fermented. Grain is kept whole for stability, sprouted for vitamins, milled into multiple textures for multiple uses. Even water is reimagined, boiled into broths, tamed into small beer, run through channels that chill by design. Redundancy isn't wasteful here, it's graceful. It acknowledges that nature can change its mind without warning. The third discipline is scale. Medieval households calibrate methods to their size and their climate. A cliffside community might own the wind, and so invent drying towers. A bogland farm might bury butter in cool, acidic peat. A riverside village coaxes the stream to do what a refrigerator now does with brute electricity. There's genius in these local optimizations. Too often, we narrate the past as if it were uniform, but medieval Europe was a mosaic, and adaptation is a local art. The fourth discipline is social scaffolding. Techniques need institutions. Gleaning customs to sweep the last calories from a field without shame. Communal ovens to multiply heat and skill. Granaries with rules strict enough to prevent a quiet tragedy. Seed banks that carry genetic memory forward like a candle through a drafty corridor. Without these, clever methods remain fragile. With them, they become civilization's muscle memory. Why begin here, at the threshold of the cellar, rather than inside it? Because if you grasp the posture, the technologies make sense. Salting is not just chemistry, it is a promise to late winter. Fermentation is not just practice, it is an alliance with microscopic allies. A clamp of roots under straw is not just storage, it is a vote for February. The point is not that any single trick saved anyone. The point is that a braided system makes failure local, not fatal. There's a humbling mirror hidden here for us moderns. We have made food abundant and portable in ways that would have seemed mythic to those families by the hearth. And we have traded away resilience to do it. A storm empties shelves in hours. A broken truck line becomes a citywide experiment in appetite. The medieval answer to volatility was never to dominate it. The answer was to learn it, befriend it, and build small, durable agreements with it, repeated across a landscape of human hands. It's slower than pushing a button. It also survives the days when buttons don't work. As we walk the chapters ahead, you'll hear words that sound technical: osmosis, lactic acid, thermal mass, but we will translate as we go. The people who invented these methods often lacked those terms, yet they understood the behaviors behind them with a craftsperson's intimacy. How salt migrates, how smoke behaves in a beam-roofed room, how stone absorbs and releases chill, how a bubble's sound in a crock changes over days. Consider it a different language for the same truths. You'll also meet the ethics that accompany the work. Waste is a sin here, not because a sermon says so, but because the ledger of survival says so. To throw away fat is to throw away months. To ignore bones is to ignore meals. To forget a clamp is to forget a week of stew. And yet, there is generosity, too ritualized in ways that protect dignity. The poor glean not as beggars but as participants in a known pattern. The oven's heat is a commons. Seed is defended from desperation, because to eat it is to eat the future. By the end of this opening, I hope you can feel the temperature of the room we're entering. It's warmer than the storm outside, but not warm. It smells of smoke and wool and cabbage and work. Somewhere under the floor, the earth is keeping a slow promise to the roots laid down in autumn. On a shelf, a jar tattoos the quiet with an occasional ferment sigh. The door is barred against the wind, not the neighbor. Time moves differently here. It's a circle braided from chores. So, welcome to the edge, not as a place of panic, but as a classroom. In the chapters to come, we will put our hands into salt. We will lift cellar doors. We will listen to crocks. We will seal meat under fat and watch sugars transform fruit into long-keeping brightness. We will learn why each method works and where it fails, how to pair them like tools in a chest, and how, taken together, they form a philosophy disguised as supper. The cold is real, the hunger can be too, but the answer is older than the problem, and it is made of many small answers, learned slowly, repeated faithfully, shared widely. That's the medieval miracle, not magic memory, not abundance alignment. And as we step into part 2, salt and smoke will have the first word. Salt is not seasoning here, it is law. In a world where warmth is rationed and time itself tries to rot your supper, salt rewrites the rules. It drags water out of flesh, the same water that microbes need to multiply, then stands guard, grain by grain, over months that would otherwise belong to decay. Smoke is salt's conspirator, threading meat with phenols and aldehydes, closing microscopic doorways, leaving a flavor signature that announces, even before you taste it, this food was defended. Begin with the simplest practice, dry salting. Medieval households were not guessing. They worked from ratios learned in the Ledger of Winters. A common rule of thumb, roughly 1 pound of coarse salt for 10 pounds of meat, adjusted for humidity, temperature, and cut. Coarse crystals, not fine, because bigger grains dissolve more slowly and keep drawing moisture longer. Meat was cut to expose crevices where rot would love to begin. Then every fold was loaded with salt. Pieces were layered in tubs or barrels, with thick blankets of white between them. A weight stone, wood, anything clean and heavy, pressed down to push brine outward. Days passed, the tub whispered liquid. What came out was denser, firmer, safer. Brining was the deeper art, because liquid carries salt into places dry crystals can't reach. The test was folk science, in the best sense. Float an egg. If it rides high, the brine is saturated enough to be worth the work. Meat, or fish, rested in that dense solution for weeks, sometimes months. Herbs were not decoration. Bay, juniper, pepper, where trade allowed, and mustard seed, all carry compounds that make life difficult for spoilage bacteria. The result isn't just salty. It is tuned, protein tightened, water-bound, microbes denied jurisdiction. Smoking begins where salting pauses. Imagine a cottage with no chimney, just a central hearth, and a hole that negotiates with weather. Racks are hung above the smoke path, far enough from fire that heat won't cook the meat, close enough that smoke can do its slow arithmetic. Woods were chosen like spices. Oak burns steady, leaving sweetness that behaves itself. Beech lends a nutty roundness. Apple and cherry lay down fruit notes that feel like summer remembered. Juniper is a preservative as much as a perfume. Its resin carries antimicrobial bite. You do not need the vocabulary of phenolic compounds to know it works. You need a winter where the smoke joint doesn't sadden early. Hot smoke is quick, a few hours to a day flavor and a little protection. Cold smoke is patient, drifting around meat for days on end in a space kept cool so the fat doesn't render. The difference is not academic, it's shelf life. A well-salted, cold smoked ham shifts from ingredient to asset, a lump of time you can eat. Butter, perishable as a sigh, was taught longevity by salt. First, water is chased out, worked, pressed, folded, until the buttermilk is gone. Then salt is needed in more than a pinch, often 10 to 15% by weight. Packed into a crock, sealed under a guarding layer of salt, it becomes something else. Not spread for bread, but fat for cooking deep in the calendar when cows are stingy and grass is a rumor. Wealthy households sometimes boasted of years-old stores. For poorer ones, a crock that lasted to spring was success enough. Jerky, contrary to modern convenience store fame, is not thin meat left near heat. It begins with lean cuts sliced along the grain for structure. A quick bath in brine lays down an initial defense. Then the strips hang where heat is gentle and air moves. In drier climates, sun does the job. In damp places, the hearth's constant exhale is the drying wind. Proper jerky snaps rather than smears, resists teeth a little, gives back cleanly. A pouch of it is a week of labor insurance. Blood is not waste, it is nutrition, handled promptly. Collected with salt whisked in to prevent clotting, mixed with oats or barley and suet, perfumed with whatever the garden can spare, stuffed into casings, poached to set the matrix, then smoked to add keepability. Black pudding is an essay on thrift that ends in warmth. These techniques are not interchangeable gimmicks. They are a system with redundancy. Salt alone keeps, smoke alone delays. Together, they create a preservation gradient. Think like a medieval kitchen. Small fish, heavily brined and fully dried, can travel. A large ham, buried in salt, then long smoked, can anchor winter meals. Trimmings become sausage. Fat is rendered and saved. Bones wait their turn in broth that will itself be reduced until it can be cut. Failure modes were known and feared. Too little salt and interior pockets stay wet, inviting trouble. Too much salt and you trade calories for a tongue you cannot please. Smoke too hot and you cook the exterior, trapping moisture where it can fester. Too cool and you perfume rot. The corrections are practical. Vent a door, shift a rack, add a fist of salt, drain a barrel, and remake the brine. The senses smell of clean salt versus sour wrong, feel of a surface that's tacky dry rather than slick, were instruments as exact as any gauge. Take a breath with me. If you can picture that hanging forest of meats, the slow piano of drips, the hearth low and disciplined, hold that image for a moment. A short pause helps the mind keep what the hands have learned. Then, we'll continue. Salt's economy shaped neighborhoods. Salt could be dear taxed, traded, tied to weather so families pooled risk. Used brine was strained and repurposed for vegetables, strength adjusted by taste and the old egg trick. Final spent brines went to animal feed or were thrown where weeds needed humbling. Households compared notes the way we now compare apps. Which source of rock salt was cleaner? Which coastal merchant's bay salt ran less bitter? In lean years, agreements mattered. A barrel shared, a curing space offered, a promise of help at slaughter in exchange for ribs in February. Regional fingerprints grew from materials at hand. Along cold coasts, stockfish unsalted, air-dried cod gone board hard was a miracle of timing and wind. Inland, where wood smoke is a native language, bacon and hams were signatures. In forests, heavy with mast, pigs fattened on acorns gave fat that took salt like poetry. None of this was quaint, it was optimization. If you peek behind the chemistry, the philosophy appears. Salting is humility. Accept that water is both life and liability. Smoking is patience. Allow an invisible element air, made visible by fire, to lay down its thin protections, day after day. Brining is faith in equilibrium. What is outside will move inside given time, and the right balance will hold. Each method is a treaty signed with physics. The craft extends beyond meat. Fish bellies become stores. Cheese rinds are salted to form barriers that set the stage for controlled rot, the good kind we call ripening. Vegetables can be brined briefly before drying, training their cells for a longer journey. Even butter, that vulnerable declaration of summer, learns the slow grammar of salt and crock. Modern kitchens can replicate much of this with thermometers, nitrates, and stainless steel, but the medieval version ran on attentiveness. Is the brine willing, as an old saying, had it salty enough to lift an egg with pride? Does the smoke smell sweet rather than sharp? Does the meat feel leathery dry at the surface while remaining supple at the core? These are qualitative metrics honed by repetition and corrected by memory. By the time winter leans in, the rafters tell a story. Strings of sausage like punctuation, slabs wearing their salt as frost, fish paired tail to tail. The whole ceiling turned into a slow, edible calendar. You don't just see it, you schedule by it. This ham is for the depth of winter. That bacon is for the weeks the roads are mud. Those fish are for fasting days when meat is forbidden, but calories are not. Salt and smoke won't be the only chapters in our defense against scarcity, but they deserve to go first because they teach the three habits all the others repeat: measure, weight, and layer. Measure with hands and eyes, and a few clever tests. Wait long enough for physics to do free work you could never afford with fuel. Layer methods, so that if one fails, the others still stand. Next, we go downward into the earth's cool patience. We will open a root cellar and feel how stone and soil make promises that air alone can't keep. Bring a lamp, the lessons breathe better in the dark. The earth holds its own weather. A handspan below the frost, time slows. A few feet deeper, it becomes almost indifferent to season. Where the wind scolds and the sun forgets fairness, soil remembers a middle path, cool, damp, steady. Medieval families learned to borrow that steadiness. They built rooms inside the planet, taught baskets to breathe sand, asked clay to sip water and give back cold. If salt and smoke were sentries, earth and stone were the quiet fortress. Begin with the root cellar. Not a hole, but an argument with geology conducted in stone and patience. The best was set into a slope, 3 sides against the hill, so winter couldn't pry its way in and summer couldn't shove its heat down the stair. Depth mattered, shallow, and your food rides the weather's mood swings. Too deep and groundwater turns storage into a lesson in mildew. 6 to 8 feet is a sweet compromise in many soils, but the signal isn't the measuring stick, it's the air. A good cellar smells like damp limestone and apples, never like rot. The walls, dry-laid stone, are more than structure. Each rock is a small thermal battery. By day they sip warmth from air that wanders in with you. By night they give it back in a slow exhale, flattening the peaks and valleys of temperature. Mortar is used sparingly or not at all, so the walls can breathe, wicking moisture and preventing the dead air pockets where mold conducts its choir. Above, a timber ceiling and a thick earthen cap make a lid the weather can't argue with. Ventilation is the cellar's heartbeat, a low intake near the floor, a high exhaust near the ceiling. Cold air pools, warm air rises. The 2 vents kindle a faint, continuous circulation, just enough movement to prevent stagnation, not enough to parch. In winter, you can throttle the upper vent on brutal nights. In shoulder seasons, you open it wide and let the world tug a little harder. The point isn't draft, it's balance. Inside, order is survival. Apples do not bunk with potatoes. Ethylene from the fruit will hurry sprouts from the tubers like a bad foreman. Cabbages tolerate damp corners where the floor sweats. Onions want it a touch drier. Carrots prefer their old friend, the ground carried in as sand. Shelves hold what likes to sit. Bins cradle what likes to pile. Hooks keep cured meats off anything a mouse might consider a staircase. Baskets are splints for breath. Lids are compromise, never seal. A good cellar is a quiet conversation among species and humidity. Sand storage is a cellar within the cellar. The trick is separation. Carrots, beets, parsnips, turnips, each is buried in clean, bone-dry river sand inside a box or barrel. No root touching another. The sand becomes a steadying friend. It drinks what should not linger on the skin, insulates each vegetable from the microclimate of its neighbor, and slows the respiration that would otherwise spend the root savings before spring. The details are fussy in the way all good crafts are. Carrot tops trimmed to keep them from exhaling the moisture you need. Beets prefer sand that is not desert dry, but not wet enough to clump. The sand baked once before use to chase out hidden damp and opportunists. Modern minds call this microenvironment control. Medieval hands called it doing things properly. Where stone is scarce or purse is thin, the clamp is a democracy of dirt and straw. Choose a site that drains a small rise, a shoulder of field that wind remembers. Lay down a cushion of straw. Build a conical heap of roots with the hardier guard vegetables on the outside, turnips, big beets, and the tender sweet in the heart, carrots, parsnips. Cover with more straw, then earth tamped firm enough to shed rain, loose enough that the pile can breathe. Leave a tuft of straw poking from the top, a chimney for excess heat and moisture. You open the clamp like a fox does a cache. Small holes, careful hands, quick closings. The beauty here is scale and humility. A family can raise a mound in an afternoon and eat from it for months, the field itself serving as pantry wall. Water, too, can be taught to cool without freezing. Stream houses, small structures built over a fast, shallow run, turn a creek into a larder. Stone floors with carved channels let water braid under crocks and jars. The constant flow moves heat away faster than stagnant air. Shaded roofs keep the sun from undoing the work. In such places, milk keeps past noon. Fish minds its manners for a precious while. Churned butter naps in the current's whisper. The same principle animates well cooling. Platforms lowered by rope to just above the waterline. Baskets sealed against splash. The earth's groundwater temperature doing what an electric thermostat now performs noisily. The pulley creaks. Someone's dinner descends into yesterday's cold. Then there are the caves, cathedrals of stable air that civilizations discover and promptly fill. Not every village had one, but where geology offered, people accepted. Deep galleries kept cheeses in their adolescence, coaxed hams through the long patience between salted and sublime, let seeds sleep without fear of sudden heat. Entrance tunnels were tightened or baffled to keep drafts from playing jokes. Shelves and rails built where the rock allowed. Marks and tally scratches kept the social ledger honest. A hill with a cave was a bank. Its currency was taste and February. The bog is a different university altogether, acid, oxygen-starved, cool as a rumour. Wrap butter in cloth or pack it in a tub, then lower it into peat's slow chemistry. Months later, sometimes years, it returns with a tang of the place that made it timeless. In such preservations, the environment is not just container, but collaborator. Tannins, temperatures, anoxia, if you don't need the words, you still need the habits. Mark the spot, measure the chord, remember that peat remembers everything and gives nothing for free. Not all cooling is underground. Evaporative tricks make summer bearable where summers are impatient. A porous clay pot inside another, the gap packed with wet sand, a cloth draped across the mouth, no magic, only physics. As water climbs out of clay and becomes air, it steals heat from what remains. Kitchens find breezes for such pots. Storerooms lay dampened stone, and let the floor give back chill as the water leaves. The yield isn't refrigerator cold, but it makes a day's difference, and days are what preservation buys. Let's rest a heartbeat. Picture a lamplight cellar stair, the air getting cooler with each tread, the smell turning from room to root, from smoke to stone. Hold that sensation for a breath. Small pauses help the mind keep the shape of places. Then we'll step down the last few steps together. There are failure modes here, as surely as in smokehouses. Too much wet, and the cellar becomes a gardener for mold. Too little, and the roots sigh themselves into leather. Air that moves too fast will desiccate. Air that sulks will sour. The portfolio approach remains the sanity. Clamp some, cellar some, sand some, ferment some. Redundancy makes error a bruise, not a break. What's striking, if you listen to the old advice, is how much of it is about listening back. Cellars are tuned by ear and nose as much as by eye. If the apples sing too loudly, an old phrase suggests meaning the aroma is strong, move them. If the floor weeps, meaning condensation, feed the breath, open the high vent a thumb's width more. None of this is mystical, it's practice. And practice makes machines out of places. Economy and community run through the stonework as surely as in salt. Not every household owns the slope it wants or the stone it needs, so cellars become shared like ovens. A neighbor's clamp feeds yours when rats find your corner. A village set by a spring will share the well's cool by rota. Agreements are fences you build around luck. The philosophy is consistent across methods. Salt asked you to measure and wait. Cellars ask you to arrange and attend. They are calendars that do not hang on the wall but live under the yard. They reward foresight, punish sloppiness, forgive small sins, and multiply modest virtues. Most importantly, they let the earth do the expensive work, moving heat gently, carrying water in measured breaths, holding still when the sky panics. By the time snow owns the path to the door, a household with a good cellar becomes a quiet miracle. A basket lifts, and there are carrots as bright as October. A sack opens, and potatoes smell like damp dirt and promise. A shelf yields apples that press their fragrance into the air, enough sweetness to make a child believe in spring. The room is not abundance, it is continuity. In the arithmetic of famine, continuity is wealth. We will carry this logic forward. Earth and stone showed us how to make shelter into tool, air into ally, water into assistant. Next, we invite a stranger turned friend to the table, the invisible nations of yeast and bacteria. Fermentation is the art of letting good organisms occupy food before the bad ones even unpack. It smells louder than a cellar and sings longer than a smokehouse. Bring a clean jar, bring patience. Bring your skepticism, too will convert it with bubbles. If earth and stone are the quiet fortress, then air and fire are the sentries that never sleep. Drying sounds simple, leave it in the sun until it's not wet. But medieval drying is choreography. It's the management of heat that mustn't cook, wind that mustn't tear, light that mustn't scorch, and time that mustn't forget. Done well, drying doesn't just preserve, it concentrates. Apples become autumn in thin coins. Herbs become their own ideas, intensified. Meat becomes travel. Begin with air, the oldest tool. A medieval yard on a bright day is a forest of racks and lines. Lattices woven from willow, frames of hazel, mats of reed, hoops strung with thread. The rule is space air must pass freely on all sides, so nothing lies heavy on a flat surface where moisture can pool and invite trouble. Sun is a friend who talks too much. You let her speak, but you don't let her dominate the conversation. Direct rays are for tough skins and sturdy sugars. Shade is for delicate leaves and berries that bruise with a glance. Every rack has a reason, every angle a purpose. Fruit requires craft that borders on fussiness. Apples are cored and sliced to uniform thickness, thick enough to keep texture, thin enough to surrender water. Pears are treated with patience. Stone fruits are halved and pitted. Their cut faces turn to the air like small sails. In hot, dry districts, a quick blanch in water can check enzymes that would otherwise race ahead into browning. Elsewhere, a light dip in honeyed water both sweetens and intrudes on microbes' plans. The goal is not a brittle relic, but a pliant, leathery piece, bend without breaking, a soft sheen rather than stick. When the sun threatens to tip from drying to cooking, the clever position, a white cloth to bounce light and soften heat. Shade can be engineered. Herbs are speed and timing. Harvest mid-morning after the dew has gone, but before oils fly from the leaves in noon's command. Bundle small fingers' width so stems are not strangled, and tie them with fibre that breathes. Hang them upside down in a dry, dim place with a mild draught. Rafters, porch beams, the cool eaves of a bakehouse. Leaves that crumble cleanly between finger and thumb are done. Anything that gums is not. Roots are another story, scrubbed, sliced, spread. Their medicine is thick and needs coaxing. Heat must be low, air persistent, patience unwavering. The reward is potency that a winter remembers. Meat drying is a stricter science, because risk hides inside. Start lean fat goes rancid and greases the path for ruin. Strips are cut with the grain for strength, salted or dipped in brine to set boundaries, then hung where air moves, and heat is a rumor, not a sermon. In damp climates, the hearth becomes a wind, not flames licking, but the steady exhale of a banked fire, and sometimes a kiss of smoke, not enough to cook, enough to chase flies, and add a shy preservative edge. Good dried meat is a lesson in texture, resistant at first, then yielding, dry to the touch, never greasy, a smell that reads as clean, not gamey. You don't chew jerky so much as negotiate with it. Communal ovens, those civic hearths, offer a second harvest, residual heat. After bread is drawn and hunger's clamour quiets, stones hold hours of warmth that would be wasted if not invited to work again. Trays of sliced apples, racks of mushrooms, baskets of onions are fed into the oven's afterglow. No flame, only the calm breathing of masonry. In some villages, oven schedules include drying turns, when households arrive in order with baskets labelled, and the oven keeper, often a woman with the easy authority of practiced judges, when to open and when to leave be. The oven is a battery charged by bread. In wetter regions where summer refuses cooperation, ingenuity becomes architecture. Drying lofts under long roofs, louvered at both gables, gather wind and shed rain. Slatted floors keep rodents honest, and air honest too. Some communities blessed with constant breezes, or perched where valleys funnel, wind raise drying towers. Tall, airy barns, whose walls are more gap than plank, their interior a vertical maze of rails and hooks. Doors and shutters are not merely for storms, they are valves that meter the sky. Fire joins air as partner rather than bully. You don't want food to know the taste of flames, only their patient memory. A bed of coals under a stone flag, an adobe oven cooling from yesterday's work, a room whose hearth is a neighbour through a shared wall. Temperature wears many names in a village. Low enough is measured by the back of a hand, the pace of a bead of water on stone, the way beeswax softens and holds. The craft is improvisation backed by rules. Let's pause here, take a gentle breath, and picture a row of racks, afternoon light turning edges to gold, a low wind combing through hanging leaves and sliced fruit. Hold it a moment, the mind keeps better what the body quietly imagines. When you're ready, we'll step back in. Fruit leather is a medieval masterclass in control. Pulp is cooked low and slow to thicken, never scorch, never rush. Honey is added not as candy but as ally, raising sugar concentration beyond the reach of many microbes. The paste is spread thin on oiled boards or cloth, then set where air can do honest work without nibbling insects. When a sheet peels cleanly and flexes without tearing, it's rolled and tied or cut into squares and stacked. It's not dessert alone, it's vitamin and quick energy, wrapped for travel, immune to bumps and time's small insults. Grain, too, must be dried. Harvested too wet, it will sweat itself into sourness in the bin. In fair seasons, the sheaves stand in stooks, small teepees of grain that shrug off showers while air slips between. In obstinate weather, barns with slatted sides and high floors invite drafts from below. In some regions, small kilns, stone vaults warmed by a fire in a separate chamber, finish grain to safe moisture without smoke. Malt houses evolve from this logic, managing humidity for sprouting and then drying without roasting the flavor away. If salt is life insurance for meat, dryness is solvency for grain. Failure has signatures. Fruit that darkens into bitterness was cooked by a sun you didn't deflect. Herbs that taste of dust were hung where air bullied rather than courted. Meat that case hardens dry shell outside, damp heart within was too close to heat and too far from patience. Grain that cackles when poured tiny crackling sounds may still be losing water and needs another day aloft. Notices like these become proverbs, and proverbs become technique. Protection from pests is a whole subcraft. Screens woven from horsehair or fine reed keep flies honest. Herbs like tansy and rue can be braided into door frames to discourage visitors with too many legs. Smoke again, that quiet ally may be wafted through a drying room at day's end to lay down a scent line most insects read as elsewhere. Cats are preservationists in fur, and so are swallows, their nests tolerated above rafters, where their appetite patrols the air. Economic sense threads through the rafters. Drying lets you move abundance through time without salt's price or a mason's labor. It makes transport cheap. A basket of dried apples weighs a fraction, feeds the same mouths, and spoils rarely. It turns small, ugly fruit, unsaleable fresh, into winter treasure. It gives herbs a second life as medicine and seasoning when gardens sleep. And because many hands can tend racks and turn sheets, drying is a social task. Children learn thickness with knives, elders judge weather by horizons, the work talks while it happens. Regional palates flower from materials and climate. In the high, clear airs, meat dries clean and sweet. On fog-bent coasts, fish becomes board-stiff stock for voyages. Orchard countries, perfect apple rings lacquered with a whisper of smoke. Forest villages string mushrooms like coins. Vineyards rescue surplus grapes into raisins on straw mats turned, with a rake whose tines know tenderness. Each place teaches air to sing in its key. The philosophy hiding in all this looks familiar now. Drying says, again, measure this time in thickness and distance and airflow. Wait until water leaves at the speed that quality can bear. Layer pair air with a little heat, shade with a little light, racks with residual oven warmth, and always redundancy with other methods. Dried food marries well with cellars. Fruit leather lives happily beside salted fat. Dried herbs become the bright thread in winter broths whose bones were first roasted, then simmered, then dried to jellied bricks of time. By the close of a good season, the home changes shape. Rafters are vocabulary. Hooks spell sentences. The room holds weeks as objects. You can tell what the weather was by how a pear bends, how a sprig shatters. If smokehouses write in bass notes, drying sings alto clear, persistent, woven through everything. We have worked with air and the memory of fire. Next, we will invite the living. Fermentation is the deliberate hosting of invisible allies who acidify, flavor, and defend. It is louder than drying, wilder than cellars, and yet as rule-bound as salt. Bring a clean vessel and a respect for bubbles. The next chapter breathes. Fermentation is the art of inviting the right guests and locking the wrong door. It looks like rot's cousin, but behaves like a saint. It acidifies and aromatizes, makes enemies of pathogens, feeds us vitamins we didn't know we needed, and stretches harvests across months that would otherwise gnaw at stores. Medieval people didn't name lactobacilli or Saccharomyces, but they knew the grammar of their behavior. They could hear when a crock had found its stride, smell when a cheese rind had stood up, and feel with a fingertip when dough had captured enough life to stand on its own legs. Start with cabbage, because cabbage teaches the whole syllabus. Shredded, salted at roughly 2 to 3% by weight, and pressed until the leaves surrender their brine, cabbage becomes a small universe. The salt pulls water and, with it, sugars. Those sugars are a ladder for lactobacilli, which climb rapidly, lowering pH into a neighborhood where bullies can't live. A weightstone, clean wood, a tailored lid keeps the vegetables under their own juice so oxygen stays out. Then, you wait. The first days fizz with heterofermenters that make both acid and aroma. Weeks bring the quieter, single-minded workers that deepen sour and complexity. Old barrels and crocks become talismans because their pores host microscopic friends from batches past. Families pass vessels the way they pass songs. Pickling is not one thing but a small nation. Vinegar pickles are immediate, a surrounding moat of acetic acid that says no with authority. Brine pickles are slower and, in many kitchens, preferred. Salt water invites naturally present lactic acid bacteria to establish law, turning cucumbers, onions, turnips, even whole heads of garlic into crisp citizens who resist spoilage. Spices are not mere flavor politics. Mustard seed, dill, coriander, bay, and juniper bring antimicrobial compounds of their own. Technique is choreography, Pre-salt cucumbers to pull water. Blanch onions to keep bite without bite. Skim the surface daily, because a white yeast film can colonize even good projects if you ignore them. Success sounds like a faint hiss when you lift the lid, and smells like clean, sour, never murk. Cheese is controlled decadence. Milk is too perishable to hold in its first self. So medieval households learned to curdle, cut, heat, salt, press, and age, until milk became many shelf lives in disguise. The choices matter. Rennet from calf or kid makes firm curds for long aging. Vinegar or sour whey makes soft, quick cheeses for short weeks. Cut curds larger for moist cheeses, smaller for drier. Cook them higher for tight textures, lower for supple ones. Salt at the right moment to draw whey and build rind. Then housing matters. A cave with steady cool and breath. A cellar corner that doesn't swing with weather. A shed whose boards admit a whisper. Surface molds and bacteria are not villains when chosen. They are decorators and bodyguards. A bloom rind tells a story of humidity and airflow. A washed rind testifies to brine rubs and the invisible constellations they shepherd. Cheese is how you turn a summer pasture into a winter hearth. Bread is a symphony reduced to a culture you can feed with your hands. A sourdough starter is less pet than packed. You give it flour and water at intervals. It gives you leavening, protection, and flavor. It is not clean yeast in a packet. It is a city of organisms, yeasts and bacteria, arguing and collaborating. Hydration shapes personality. Stiffer cultures favor certain acids and slower rhythms. Wetter ones ferment with jazz. Temperature steers speed and sourness. A good starter smells somewhere between yogurt and green apple, looks lively, and keeps a memory of its last feeding as a record on the jar. You can rescue a neglected one, stir off color hooch, discard, refresh in small, frequent meals, because ecosystems forgive. Bread born from such a culture keeps longer than quick yeast loaves. The acids discourage mold. The crumb resists staling. The flavor wears patience like a coat. Beer and small ale were not indulgence alone. They were liquid safeguards. Water can betray. A short fermentation and a boil will not. Malting begins with a paradox. You sprout grain to wake up enzymes that unlock sugar. Then you arrest that life with warmth so you can harvest those sugars later. Mashing is an enzyme. Dance temperatures stepped or held so starches dissolve into fermentable food. Wort is boiled to sanitize, and, where hops are known, bittered and preserved. Where hops are scarce, gruit herbs step in. Yeast takes the handoff, converting sugar to alcohol and carbon dioxide. Small ale, low alcohol, lighter body, was daily fuel even for children, safer than raw water and friendlier to work. Stronger ales were winter's sweater, celebration's choir. Dairy ferments form a constellation around the churn. Cultured buttermilk, what remains after butter, then given hours to grow friendly bacteria, turns from waste to tonic. Clabbered milk thickens at room temperature under a mat of its own microbes. Curds soft and tender for quick eating. Kefir, where known, is a colony in its own right. Gelatinous grains of yeast and bacteria, dropped into milk, produce a drink you can pour, tangy and slightly effervescent. Whey, the often ignored twin of curds, becomes something again, boiled down into whey cheeses, fermented into thin, lively drinks, added back to bread for protein and a bit of sour. In a smart kitchen, nothing dies. Everything changes state. What fermentation demands is not equipment but attention. Clean tools keep the right wars from starting. Salt ratios are not suggestions, they're treaties. Oxygen is both friend and saboteur. Knowing when to exclude it, submerged vegetables, and when to admit it, certain cheeses, separates keeping from weeping. Temperature is a steering wheel. A cool room builds a slower acidity with broader flavors. A warm corner races toward sharp with less grace. The work is daily, in a gentle way. Skim a film, press a weight back into place, feed a starter, rotate a cheese. Your senses become metrics. Clean sour versus dirty sour, a bubble's language, a rind's tack. Take a quiet breath with me. Picture a shelf of crocks, lids beaded with condensation, an occasional shy blurp breaking the room's soft rumble, a loaf rising under cloth, a wheel of cheese drying to a mat. Keep that image for a beat. A small pause helps memory tighten its knots. Now, on we go. Fermentation is also society. Communal ovens exist because fermentation and baking are best scheduled. Same with breweries that serve multiple households. Their malt floors, the village's warm lungs. Starters travel in ladles to neighbors who lost theirs in a move or a mishap. A good whey stream becomes a baker's secret. A brewer's spent grain feeds pigs that will, seasons later, become sausages that ferment in their turn. Skills reinforce and intersect until the village is a circuit rather than a string of disconnected tasks. Failure happens, and medieval kitchens catalogue it without melodrama. Soft pickles, the brine was too timid or the temperature too bold. Slimy beans, oxygen found a party, a cheese that collapses. The curd was cut wrong or pressed before it was ready. A starter that smells like nail varnish. It's hungry and overwarm. Cool it, feed it often, and it will become polite again. The remedy is almost always patience and small corrections rather than heroics. Flavor is not a byproduct, but the banner of success. Sauerkraut that sings right, tastes bright, not blunt. Pickles are crisp and carry the garden like a telegram. Breads have a veil of tang that lifts grain from staple to story. Beers wear the field in foam. Cheeses speak in textures as much as aromas. The poor cannot afford luxury, but they can afford time, and time is the most honest luxury food knows. Consider also how fermentation multiplies nutrition. Lactic acid bacteria add B vitamins. Souring lowers phytates in grain and makes minerals less shy. Protein is pre-digested in cheeses, easing work for winter-tired stomachs. We moderns buy supplements. They built little factories in clay and wood. Philosophically, fermentation flips a fear. Decay is the loss of pattern to time. Fermentation is the redirection of that loss into new order. It's a modest admission. You will not stop change, but you can ask it to do something useful on the way through. Salt said measure. Cellars said arrange. Drying said pace. Fermentation says welcome, with rules. Regional character blooms in these jars and wheels. In coastal places, fish sauces, layers of scraps, and coarse salt age into umami maps that last years and rescue thin winter broths. In orchard belts, cider ferments become both drink and vinegar, looping back to preserve vegetables and clean benches. In sheep country, tangy yogurts stand in bowls like edible snowfall. In ryelands, starters dark as barns raise loaves that slice like doors. Microbes are local citizens. They draw borderlines finer than language. By late autumn, a house alive with ferments feels like a choir under the floorboards. Something always murmurs. A hand learns to move lids like a conductor. Quiet here, encourage there. There is courage in these chores, not loud, just persistent. You trust the unseen to keep its word because, over years, it has. We leave this chapter with our hands washed in whey and our pockets smelling faintly of bread and vinegar. Ahead lies fat and honey, two clever barriers that preserve by denying water its games and by sweetening time into compliance. Where fermentation persuades, fat excludes, and sugar stabilizes. The next tools taste like feast and behave like vaults. Bring a spoon, bring thrift, bring that same patient attention. It will be repaid with months. Preservation is often a game of water. Microbes need it, flavors travel with it, time hides in it. Fats and sugars win by denying water its favorite tricks. Rendered lard, tallow, olive oil, clarified butter, thick honey, boiled syrups, fruit pastes, each builds a moat around food, or pulls water into bonds so tight that spoilage can't find a foothold. If fermentation is persuasion, fat is exclusion, and honey is enchantment. Begin with rendering, because everything that follows rests on clean fat. Fresh pork fat becomes lard, beef or mutton fat becomes tallow. The method is simple and disciplined. Trim away meat and glands, cut fat small, heat low and patient so it melts before it scorches. A splash of water at the start spreads heat and buys safety until it steams off. Cracklings rise and brown the cook's reward, and the liquid below turns clear as amber glass. Strain through cloth into a dry crock. When it sets, good lard is pale and mild, good tallow is firm and snow-coloured. Both last months in a cool place, longer if you keep air and light out. They aren't merely cooking mediums. They are doors you can shut between food and decay. Sealing under fat confit in one dialect, potted meats in another uses that door. Duck legs salted, gently simmered in their own fat until tender, then packed in a pot and covered with a lid of pure fat. Pork rillettes shredded and submerged the same way. Even fish, gently cooked and hidden beneath a cap of oil. The fat sets into a lid that air can't cross. When you scoop, you reseal. Done well, it's a pantry of small miracles. Each jar a time capsule marked in grease. Medieval kitchens turned this principle inside out too. The crust as vault. Raised pies coffins were built with hot water dough strengthened by suet. The shell's job wasn't elegance, it was architecture. Meat went in heavily seasoned and sometimes pre-cured. Fat-lined gaps, a lid sealed the dome. After baking, a vent at the top allowed a final pour of rendered fat or aspic, filling spaces that air would otherwise colonize. The result could travel and could last food encased in a brick you might or might not eat. In a world without tin cans, flour and fat made the can. Clarified butter is fat taught to behave in heat and time. Butter is an emulsion of fat, water, and milk solids. Those milk solids are where trouble and flavor both live. Melt gently. Skim the foam. Let the water simmer off. Pour the clear gold while the brown solids stay behind. The result keeps longer and burns less readily. In cool climates, salted butter was king. In warm kitchens or places with trade to the south, clarified butter offered a calmer shelf life. Potted fish or herbs, sunk beneath its surface, found weeks of grace. Oils shift the vocabulary by region. In olive country, jars of cheese soaked in oil mature slowly. Herbs lending perfumes while oil denies air. Anchovies and tuna, salted first, then held beneath layers of oil, become their own condiments. Vegetables blanched in vinegar and then covered in oil. Artichokes, eggplant, peppers, where known are little essays in redundancy. Acid first, then fat, two closed doors. Far from olive groves, nut oils appear walnut, hazelnut, used sparingly, treasured and often reserved for finishing and for preserving precious things like mushrooms. Aware minds today will remember the spectre of botulism in low-acid foods under oil. Medieval cooks answered with preliminary salting, souring, or the brisk hand of vinegar before the oil poured. Fats preserve by exclusion, but they also carry flavor and caloric mercy through winter. A jar of drippings on a shelf, the saved runoff of roast and pan becomes February's seasoning and insulation both. Spread on bread, folded into porridges, melted into greens, it turns mere calories into warmth. Suet, the hard fat, provides structure. It powers dumplings and puddings that travel like wrapped hunger insurance. A suet crust, baked hard and stored cool, can be revived with broth into comfort that's almost indecent in a hungry month. Now to honey, the alchemist in a comb. Honey hoards sugar so densely that many microbes cannot pull enough water from it to wake. Its acids run a quiet patrol, its enzymes mind the gates. A sealed jar can last years. A sealed comb can outlast stories. Medieval mouths knew this as sweetness. Medieval hands knew it as strategy. Fruits loved honey because honey loved them back. Berries macerated in honey become jams without copper kettles. Slices of quince or pear drowned in honey transform over weeks into translucent jewels. The method is easy to memorize and hard to rush. Fruit layered with honey in a clean crock. Wait and cloth to discourage air, a cool corner to teach patience. Over time, honey pulls water gently from the fruit while donating its own antimicrobial shield. What began as a way to keep summer becomes a condiment that reads like memory on bread. Where fuel and patience allowed, syrups and fruit pastes offered a second geometry of sweetness. Boil fruit pulp with honey until a spoon stands upright. Spread the paste into sheets, dry by air or near a retiring oven. Cut and dust with ground nuts or a veil of sugar if luxury visited that house. Quince paste membrillo by one name, cotognata by another, was a medieval celebrity because quince brings its own pectin. It sets like a sentence. Candied peels, ginger, and even nuts in honey appeared on the tables of the well-connected. But the peasant logic underneath is the same. Take water away, replace it with something microbes can't spend, and give the result a shape that stacks. Honey is also a gate to vinegar. Left to itself with water and air, a honey must ferment into mead. Given time and more air, mead souring can be coaxed into vinegar. That vinegar returns to guard vegetables and clean benches, closing another loop sweetness, to drink to acid, to preserve. In a self-respecting kitchen, no transformation happens once. Everything has a sequel. Let's pause a moment. Picture a shelf of crocks sealed in pale fat, a row of jars where pears glow beneath honey, a blocky pie cooling on the board while its vent takes a last slow breath of steam. Hold that image. A short stillness keeps the lesson from smudging. When you're ready, we'll continue. Wax and skin join the cast as auxiliaries. Beeswax melts into a tidy seal over rims. Cloth dipped in wax becomes a reusable lid that breathes less than plain linen, but more than a stone. Cheese rinds brushed with oil and wax live quieter lives, protected from drafts and rash growths. Even bladders cleaned, rinsed, tied, serve as natural membranes to cover pots, the old world cousin of a gasket. It's not pretty to modernize, but it's elegant. Materials grown nearby, ask the air to mind its manners. Economics threads through every jar. Salt can be dear, wood can be scarce. Time is always taxed. Fat and honey turn what you already own into vaults. A pig renders into soap, light, pastry, and preservation. A beehive pays in sweetness, mead, candles, and medicine. The scraps of feast feed the fast days without collapse. A village with pigs and bees is a village with buffers. Failure here has its emblems. Rancidity smells like old paint and coins, that's the fat's fragile parts oxidizing in too much light or air. The cure is prevention. Render clean, store dark, lid tight, keep out fingers that bring water and crumbs. Honey that crystallizes hasn't failed. It has changed state. Warm the jar gently, or use it, as is crystals, grind nicely into pastes. A pie that leaks meant a seal that lied. Next time, brush the seam with egg, or lay a ribbon of dough as gasket before the lid. Knowledge in these rooms is cumulative and cheap. One error pays for 10 careful habits. The deeper philosophy stays familiar. Layer methods: salt meat before you pot it, sour vegetables before you oil them, cook the fruit before you marry it to honey, seal crocks with fat, and then store them where stone keeps its temper. Wait, give fat time to clear, honey time to draw, rinds time to toughen. Measure, judge the clarity of lard, the set of paste, the firmness of a cooled pie. None of this requires a thermometer, only attention trained by seasons. By late winter, these quiet barricades feel like a choir. A spoon breaks the white lid of fat and finds pork resting like a kept promise. A knife slices a brick of quince and everything smells like harvest again. A heel of bread meets a smear of dripping and remembers the roast you ate when the first snow fell. Fat and honey are not luxuries here. They are engineering disguised as treat. We'll carry this discipline outward from the jar to the square and the hearth of neighbors. In the next part, survival becomes social rights to glean, ovens to share, granaries to guard, herds to rotate. The single household is strong. The village, coordinated, is stronger. Preservation grows legs when it learns to walk together. A single clever household can survive a mild winter. A coordinated village can survive the cruel ones. Preservation scales from jar to street when customs become law, habits become institutions, and kindness is engineered so it doesn't have to rely on mood. This is the medieval genius we undercredit. They embedded food security into the architecture of daily life, rites, rotations, rosters, locks, and ledgers, so that calories moved where they were needed, and knowledge didn't die with a single cook. Begin where the field ends, gleaning. After harvest, the law of many parishes permitted the poor to collect what scythes and sickles left behind. Not begging participation, timing was set, a bell or a day named. Borders were recognized. Trampling the standing crop was fined. The field's geometry mattered, rows aligned, so that what fell could be found. Stooks lifted, so that rain didn't turn charity into rot. Gleaners learned the weather as language. A hard wind after cutting pushed kernels into certain hollows. A drizzly afternoon glued grain to straw, where hands, not rakes, must do the work. Widows and children were often the fleetest gleaners, because persistence beats reach when what you are saving is small and many. Common rights run deeper than gleaning. Meadows were mown by turns and then opened for aftermath grazing, the animals' hooves pressing fertility back into the ground where scythes had taken their tax. Woodland pannage let pigs harvest acorns and beech mast in autumn, turning tree shade into bacon, under rules setting dates, numbers, and fees. Commons pasture was mapped by custom, whose sheep first, whose cattle last, which days the herd is driven to the brook. These are not quaint leftovers, they are logistics, smoothing feast and famine into a curve a village could ride without breaking. The communal oven is the village's warm heart and its slow battery. Wood is precious, skills are rare, heat is best shared. A bakehouse of stone, its mouth black with generations of bread, runs on schedules. Families mix dough at home, often with sour starters that carry a house's flavor. They bring shaped loaves, marked with cuts or stamped seals. The oven keeper, the woman or man, entrusted with the peel, judges readiness by sound and sight, by the color of the dome, by the way flour flashes then vanishes on hot stone. After bread, there is the second harvest. Trays of apple rings, racks of herbs, a crock of yogurt thickening in fading warmth, a pan of beans sealed in lidded pots to slow cook as the stones fall asleep. Equity is baked into the mortar, fees scaled to loaves, time allotted by queue, penalties for stealing heat with green wood or robbing the door of closure. Where a household faltered, neighbors added a loaf to their peel, a quiet redistribution device, sharper than any lecture. Granaries are the village's nervous system. Grain is time compressed and must be guarded from teeth, moisture, and despair. Communal barns rise on staddlestones, mushroom-topped pillars that deny rats a stare. Doors are double, hinges loud, locks visible. Inside, bins are measured by volume. Intakes are recorded with wooden tallies or wax tablets. Withdrawals are scheduled and supervised. A mortuary portion of each harvest may be church tithed. Another slice is village tithed, a reserve against blight or seizure. The rules can feel stern, no grain issued for ale in a lean month, no borrowing seed without collateral, no exceptions that teach others to expect exceptions, but sternness is cheaper than starvation. A well-run granary is a moral technology. Seed banks, sometimes formal, more often distributed across careful households, are a subtler treasury. Seed is different from food. Eating it is the culinary equivalent of burning rafters for warmth. So seeds live high and dry, in cloth sacks with labels that read year and field. They are lent with ceremony. They are winnowed and tested by small germination trials. Count out 100, sprout on damp cloth, calculate hope. Women's memory is the archive here, which beans like the north wall, which barley forgives a spiteful spring, which peas hold sweetness after drying. The village breeds resilience by diffusion. No single barn fire or small malice can erase next year. Livestock cooperatives tie households together with rope and milk. A small owner may hold shares of a cow that spends the season in a communal herd. Milk return is tallied by shares or rotated by days. Herding labor is pooled. Older children take turns under a watchful elder, learning routes, shade, and the voice a flock obeys. Bulls, rams, boars, dangerous, necessary, are owned collectively, their keep funded from dues. Winter stall muck becomes spring gold on fields by rota. A village pig killing is civic theatre. Knives sharp, brine barrels ready, intestines turned and scraped for sausage, fat rendered, blood spiced and stuffed, head simmered for brawn. Shares are divided by lists agreed long before the squeal. Nothing just happens. It is scheduled empathy. Fish weirs and river rights extend the ledger into water. Low walls of woven wattle or stone guide fish into baskets at predictable tides. Nets are mended in common yards. Close seasons and mesh sizes protect tomorrow against today. Salt is pooled to finish the catch. Smokehouses are collective, their timetables chalked on boards. Fines for poaching are not mere lordly whim. They are, in their best versions, ecological literacy turned into ordinance. Markets and fairs act as release valves, smoothing local surpluses into regional stability. A glut of plums in one valley becomes dried fruit in another. A village with too much cheese learns the grain prices of a cousin's town by the rhythm of pack animals. Tolls pay for repair of bridges that get food past floods. Weights and measures are inspected because a crooked scale is a thief with city clothes. Guilds, bakers, butchers, brewers encode standards that begin as craft gossip and harden into bylaws when a bad batch risks more than a reputation. Dispute resolution is food policy with manners. When a granary keyholder is accused of favoritism, the moot meets. When a man cuts his gleaning day into his neighbour's standing oats, the fine may be grain, not coin. Churches and manors loom in these scenes with mixed records, sometimes parasitic, sometimes protective, but even when power is tilted, local custom often survives as stubborn guardrail. A lord who steals the village oven earns burnt bread and sullen tenants. A priest who overlooks seed-eating earns hollow pews. Let's pause a breath. Picture the bakehouse door open to the lane, steam and laughter braiding with the smell of rye. See a circle of women counting seed into small bags, while a child reads numbers. Hear the clack of a granary lock, and the friendly mockery that keeps its keeper honest. Hold that for a beat. A small stillness helps this mesh of rules and kindness set in memory. When it feels settled, we'll step back into motion. These systems fail in patterned ways. Commons can be grazed to dirt if rules are weak or envy is strong. Granaries can mould if ventilation is forgotten. Ovens can become fiefdoms if gatekeepers grow proud. The medieval answer is not perfection, but redundancy and audit. 2 keys for 1 lock, 2 counters for 1 measure. Punishments that bite but do not maim. Customs reviewed each saint's day, with the year's events pinned to the door like a ledger read aloud. Resilience is less a wall than a weave. Economics flows through the warp. Shared infrastructure lowers individual risk and frees capital. If you don't need to build your own oven, you can buy a second goat. If the village owns a bull, your daughter's dowry can be grain, not dangerous muscle. Insurance is paid in participation. Your gleaning right exists because you volunteer for ditch clearing. Your share of the smokehouse depends on the wood you stacked. People who opt out risk more than social scorn. They step off the raft they'll need when the river rises. Knowledge moves best along social fibers. Recipes are a fraction of preservation. Timing, signs, and mischief are the rest. The oven keeper who knows to slip a pan beneath a loaf that threatens to darken shares that trick freely, and a village's bread gets better in one afternoon. The herder who hears cough in the flock and moves grazing for 3 days saves more than meat. He saves a morale that would otherwise spend quietly. Gossip, often maligned, is an information network when tuned to care rather than malice. Regional variations prove the plasticity of this social engineering. Alpine towns braid haymaking into festivals that allocate scythes and beer by meadow. Marsh villages write eel trap rotations into marriage contracts. Island parishes tune fasting calendars to fish runs so that piety and protein don't argue. Everywhere, the principle repeats. Match rule to landscape and teach it to children until it feels like weather. The deepest philosophy is simple to say and hard to live. Make survival public. A secret pantry saves one house once. A public oven saves a street every week. A private bull breeds a few calves. A village bull remakes a herd. Gleaning dignifies need. Granaries discipline hope. Seed banks project time forward in envelopes. None of this is sentimental. It is structural compassion, the kind that still works when tempers fail. By late winter, you can hear the shared table in the sounds of a place. The oven's peal, sliding like a wooden oar. The rattle of a key traded between hands. The slow creak of a loft trapdoor as sacks are lowered with laughter and threat. Even the quiet has a social shape, a Sunday where animals chew and people rest because the schedule says so and, for once, weather agrees. From here, we step into the year as a clock rather than a map. The next chapter is the rhythm section. Sowing, reaping, storing, fasting, feasting, births and milkings, slaughter and seed. Techniques don't float in air, they ride the calendar like boats on a tide. To understand why something is done, you have to know when. Bring your sense of time. The seasons are about to speak. Preservation is not a stack of tricks, it is a calendar you can eat. Medieval households didn't fight the year, they learned its steps. Each season carried a grammar of work, flavors that made sense, and rules that were less commandments than courtesies extended to time. Salt, smoke, cellars, drying, ferments, fats, and honey, none of these float free. They tie themselves to weather, daylight, grass height, river mood, and the church bell's patience. To understand why something is done, you must first know when. Begin with spring, which is not gentle. It arrives hungry. The cellars sigh, apples wrinkled, onions sprouting whispers, potatoes thinking about becoming plants again. This is the hunger gap, the weeks when winter's hoard thins and the fields are still only promises. Work moves fast. Ploughs scratch the cold soil, harrows comb it fine. Barley and oats go in, where wheat will not forgive a late hand. Peas and beans follow, insurance crops with the decency to feed from the air as well as the ground. Lambs and calves wobble into the world as grass rehearses green. Hens lengthen their laying with daylight. Bees test the air like cautious merchants. Spring kitchens practice triage. The last stout roots go to broths and pottages, flavor stretched by bones and the sharp company of pickles. Ferments are awakened or begun cool. Cabbage, if there was more to shred. New greens quickly soured to carry us through. Small ale runs steadily. A mash light enough for daily drinking, boiled for safety, fermented quick for speed. Tools are mended, thatch patched, fences stiffened, because anything broken in spring becomes failure in summer and hunger in autumn. The year is a machine. This is when you tighten bolts. Summer is urgency with a smile. Grass leaps and must be cut before it sulks. Haymaking is a choreography of weather. Scythe, spread, turn, cock, cart, each verb a prayer against rain. Dry days fill rafters with herbs, racks with fruit, poles with fish, and meat where heat is a rumor, not a decree. Gardens are abundance with rules. Lettuce bolts if ignored. Beans sulk if water is ungenerous. Cucumbers take to brine at their prime and lose courage if you wait a day too long. Milk flows with pasture. The churn becomes a metronome. Quick cheeses multiply. Soft curds are eaten young. Harder wheels begin their long, cool sentences in cellars that breathe in stone syllables. Summer kitchens are also classrooms for patience. Fruit leather spreads on boards. Vinegar mothers sit undisturbed, while insects are barred by cloth. Beer learns its style from yeast that prefers heat or shade. The communal oven takes a second career after bread. Trays of sliced apples, mushrooms, split plums bask in the stone's afterglow. Salt stores deepen. Fish runs met with brine. Small animals taken before they eat autumn's grain cured and hung. The first hams salted against a winter that feels far but travels quickly. Autumn is the hinge, the season with pockets. Harvest pours in, grain threshes and cleans, then rests before the barn swallows it. Dry matters now more than pride. A kernel too damp becomes grief in a bin. So stooks stand in fields to shrug at late showers, and lofts breathe from below. Orchards bruise the air with sweetness. The best apples are for eating fresh. The storers go to bins. The bruised become cider or vinegar. Nothing wasted, everything converted. Late beans dry for winter. Onions braid and climb to rafters. Cabbages form tight heads that mean sauerkraut is about to join the conversation again. Autumn is also the time of necessary endings. Street martins summer, those clear days of early November, mark slaughter in much of Europe. Animals you cannot feed through winter are thanked and taken. Meat is salted and smoked. Fat is rendered into lard and tallow. Blood is spiced into puddings. Skins become vessels and shoes. Seed is chosen and labelled, stored high and dry, because eating seed is eating spring, and spring holds the pen. The earth invites storage. Clamps rise from straw and dirt. Cellars are swept and sorted. Sand barrels receive their carrots, as if tucking children to sleep. Winter is accountancy with candlelight. The work slows, not because there is less to do, but because the pace belongs to the stored and the slowly transforming. Rations are honest, so many loaves per week, a ham cut to last, a named number of Sundays, a crock of sauerkraut opened on market day, a pot of beans sealed in the oven's last warmth after the week's bake. Broths become engineers, extracting last generosity from bones, then reducing to jellied bricks that run errands through the month. Spinning, mending, carving handles and pegs, sharpening, teaching, these are winter's handwork, the invisible infrastructure that makes spring less cruel. The church calendar overlays this agricultural clock like a second set of gears, sometimes easing, sometimes tightening. Fasting days and long seasons, like Lent quiet meat consumption, and favour fish, pulses, and preserved vegetables, which stretches resources by design. Feasts concentrate calories when they are briefly abundant. A slaughter yields what must be eaten fresh. Festivals align with harvests so that generosity and perishability meet kindly. Ember days punctuate the year with prayer and community labour. Rogation processions ask blessing on fields, while also walking boundaries no map could defend so well. Piety becomes logistics without ever admitting it. Animal rhythms teach humility about planning. Breed too late and births steal fodder you don't have. Too early and cold takes the firstlings. The sweet spot targets pastures rise. Poultry need daylight as much as grain. Winter eggs are rare because the sun makes them. Beekeeping is phenology with wings. Swarms follow bloom. A hive's weight tells forage tales. Honey harvest comes after the bees have had their share. Culling small stock before winter is arithmetic dressed as mercy. Weather law is data without instruments. Sow oats after the cuckoo, says one valley, and it works there because the bird's calendar matches soil temperature. Cut hay after Street John's sits on the hinge between tradition and dew point. When the oak before the ash. All these sayings are storage algorithms pretending to be poetry. Mistakes are paid in food, not marks on a test. Take a breath with me. Picture the year as a wheel laid on a table. Spring's pale spokes, summer's broad bright rim, autumn's heavy hub, winter's steel axle. Smell hay newly cocked, hear the soft calendar of a fermenting crock, feel the cold handle of a cellar door. One quiet moment fixes the pattern, then we can keep going. What ties the seasons into a system are the handoffs. Spring gives greens to the brine to bridge the hunger gap. Summer dries herbs that will rescue winter soups from sameness. Autumn pushes sugar and acid into jars that turn February into a place that still tastes of fruit. Winter returns bones to the ledger and writes notes about tools that failed so spring doesn't repeat them. The household becomes a relay team. The baton is calories. The track is a year long, and runs forever. Feast and fast are not merely moral exercises. They are load balancing. Fasting days are maintenance windows for the pantry. Feasts are planned failures of storage opportunities to eat what cannot be kept. The communal oven's schedule respects this. The granary's locks learn it. After a good harvest, there is humility. After a bad one, there are rules and neighborliness. Both years are survivable, if the rhythm holds. The philosophy that emerges is simple. Live with time, not against it. Force is expensive and brittle. Alignment is cheap and durable. A cellar does its best work when you let October be October. A cheese develops a rind because the air is this damp for this long. A ham becomes itself because the cold holds steady for weeks. You don't outwit the year. You conspire with it. By the close of a faithful cycle, a household can taste each month by opening the right door. June speaks from strings of herbs. August from jars that are sunset in glass. November from quiet hams. January from broths that whisper bone lessons. March from the first brutal, beautiful nettles that say the wheel has moved. The table becomes a clock you set with knives and ladles. Next, we test this rhythm against the edge cases, the times when the wheel slips. Famine knowledge is the dark wisdom that no one wants but everyone respects. Bark flowers, acorns, lichens, emergency seeds, a harsh syllabus that kept families alive when weather and war turned the year upside down. Bring compassion for those tools. They were used with courage, not romance. Nobody wants to study the famine code. It is the syllabus you hope stays on the shelf. Yet every resilient culture keeps it close, a set of recipes that are also warnings, methods that buy weeks, not feasts. Medieval households knew the difference between poverty and catastrophe, and they kept a second cookbook for years when rain became policy. Armies foraged like locusts, or blight wrote its name across fields. These pages are not triumphant, they are honest. Begin with trees, the tall granaries. Bark flower is not bark in the cartoon sense. You do not chew the dead grey coat. You take the inner cambium springy, pale, the living layer between bark and wood, shaved from felled or wind-thrown trees, where taking it will not kill what must stand. Pine and birch are the usual donors. Strips are dried, low and slow, then pounded to meal. Alone, the flavor is resin and fatigue. Mixed into grain at 10 to 30%, it stretches flour through a hungry month. The technique matters. Scrape thin, dry until the shards snap, grind fine so the texture disappears into dough. The bread is darker, denser, and the crumb tells the truth of the weather, but it keeps stomachs from turning on themselves. Acorns are the nobler lesson because they are abundant and complicated. Many oaks store calories in tannin-armored vaults. The armor must come off. Medieval kitchens cracked acorns, skinned them, then leached the meal in running water, mesh bags hung in a stream, or in repeated soaks with changes as fussy as laundry day. Warm water draws tannins faster, but risks flavor loss. Cold takes longer and is gentler. You keep rinsing until bitterness goes from knife to whisper. The result can be dried to flour, mixed into breads and thick porridges, or cooked fresh as dumplings. Oak years came in massed cycles. Families watched the trees like clocks, setting aside good acorns in dry lofts for winters that hadn't happened yet. Lichens are emergency food in a stricter key. Not all are friendly. Some hide acids that need careful handling. Iceland moss and rock tripe appear in chronicles and travel accounts as famine companions. The method is again in the washing. Crumble, soak, change water often, sometimes add ash or a touch of lye to neutralize bite, then boil long. The texture sits between noodle and leather. You do not serve this at feast. You serve it to keep the next day possible. The warning is as important as the recipe. Bracken fiddleheads and certain lichens carry risks even with treatment. In the old villages, plant lore had footnotes in funerals. Emergency knowledge is precise, or it is grief. Hedgerows become markets when fields fail. Nettletop's gloved hands only deliver iron and chlorophyll to bodies that have forgotten color. Young sorrel and goosefoot bring acid and greens to a pot heavy with starch. Wild garlic and ramsons perfume desperation into something like soup. Fat hen, chickweed, ground elder, mallow, weeds with good manners if picked young and cooked kindly. Hips from roses boil into syrups that smuggle vitamin C through the back door. Sloes and hawthorn berries, after frost or a hard freeze, surrender a little sweetness to preserves that are really medicines. The rule repeats: pick small, pick early, cook long, and never confuse a hedge's generosity with carelessness. Seeds and wild grains are combed from margins. Dock seeds, plantain seeds, and panic grasses can be shaken into aprons and dried, then pounded to coarse meal. Thistle roots, burdock roots, dandelion roots are scrubbed and cooked until their bitterness devolves into strength. Bulrush, cattail, rhizomes, where marshes gave permission and custom allowed, were roasted and scraped for starch. None of these are efficient compared to barley or rye. All of them are better than a promise that never arrives. Medieval famine work is arithmetic. Many small sources add up to a day. Stretching becomes an art. Pottage, the daily stew, turns thin without apology. Bones cycle through broths, then are smashed and simmered again until the water remembers them as gel. The liquor is reduced to quivering bricks that stack like savings and dissolve like mercy. Bran, usually sifted away for finer loaves, returns to bread. Ale pomace and cider pomace, pressings left from brewing and pressing, are stirred into mash and dough, so calories do not escape with flavor. Pea flours and bean flours, thriftier than wheat, take more of the load. Salt becomes precious here, not just as preservative, but as appetite's amplifier. A pinch can make thinness feel like food. Communal strategies tighten. Churches open tithe barns when the granary's rules agree. Parishes organize commons pots, civic stews fed by those who can still spare in exchange for labor by those who cannot. Fasting calendars, already woven into the year, shift from devotion to logistics: more fish, more pulses, fewer slaughter days. Gleaning rites extend into second and third passes, children leading with small fingers and baskets. Where manorial power is decent, rents may pause. Where it is not, people move at night toward forests and rivers with their famine toolkits, snares, baskets, rules whispered from grandmothers. Let's pause a beat. Picture a stream with mesh bags of acorn meal, darkening and sweetening hour by hour. A low fire under a pot where nettles surrender sting to soup. A board dusted with bark flour that smells faintly of sap. Hold it in stillness. Memory keeps better when compassion is invited. When you're ready, we'll continue. Risk management sits beneath every choice. You don't strip cambium from living trees in ways that girdle them. You harvest from windfall and firewood when you can. You don't pull the hedgerow clean. You leave seed for birds and spring. You rotate patches so the marsh forgives you next year. Even in emergency, rules hold, because the future owns the largest share of the pantry. The famine code is not only what to eat, it is how to do less harm while surviving. Taste, strangely, is part of endurance. A spoon of sour from the pickle crock wakes a tired palate and keeps the thin meal moving. A smear of last year's quince paste turns bread into memory and will. Humans do not eat calories alone. They eat stories about tomorrow. Medieval cooks improvised small dignities: a sprig of dried thyme crumbled over barley gruel, a ribbon of rendered fat stirred into cabbage water, a heel of cheese shaved, transparent, and melted into a pot to persuade families to keep going. Records of worst years: 1,315, 1,317 above all, speak of lines that should not be crossed, of bark and roots giving way to rumors darker than want. The famine code lives to prevent those lines from appearing. It collects safe plants and methods, distributes them as gossip and sermon, and drills the moves in small scarcities, so the big ones find practiced hands. Children learn nettle from hemlock, acorn from horse chestnut, sorrel's arrow from wood sorrel's heart. Knowledge is inheritance more crucial than land. By spring's late edge, when nettles rise and the first eggs return, the code can be folded away again. Its pages are not burned, they are dried, restitched, and shelved with care. Shame does not attach to them, gratitude does. The household that lived remembers who taught them to leach bitterness from acorns and how many buckets it took. The village that lived remembers whose key opened the barn and who carried water to the leaching pool in sleet. Emergency food is not a romance. It is a disciplined refusal to surrender. It says, "This tree will share a thin loaf with us. This hedge will lend us colour. This marsh will trade starch for careful hands. This bone will boil one more time." It buys time for rains to stop sulking, for seed to try again, for lambs to find grass with courage. The wheel turns because someone kept pushing. Next, we'll step out from the edge and look back at the whole design. The final chapter is philosophy gathered from practice. How the braided methods, salt and smoke, earth and stone, air and fire, ferments, fats, and the commons become more than tricks. They become a way of thinking that still works when the lights go quiet. What began as a toolkit is really a worldview. Salt and smoke, earth and stone, air and fire, ferments, fats, honey, the commons, the calendar, the famine code. Each method is a page, but the book is resilience. Not the glossy modern kind that confuses redundancy with waste and independence with isolation, but the older, sterner meaning. A way of thinking that turns fragility into choreography and turns luck, when it appears, into structure. Begin with the oldest thesis in this series. Measure, weight, layer. Salt taught measure ratios you respect, because winter enforces contracts. Cellars taught weighting temperature and humidity, smoothing chaos into steadiness. Drying taught layering air married to afterheat, shade braided with sun. Fermentation sharpened the lesson by inviting life with rules. Fat and honey made it architectural. The village scaled it. The seasons timed it. The famine code disciplined it. These are not disconnected tricks. They are different dialects of the same language. Control what you can, befriend what you cannot, and build overlapping defenses so that failure is local, not fatal. Humility sits under all of it. Medieval kitchens did not pretend to dominate decay. They redirected it. They did not expect weather to be fair. They prepared for it to be itself. Even community rites are humble in shape. Gleaning assumes harvest is imperfect. Granaries assume memory fails without locks. Ovens assume fuel is precious and skill uneven. A proud household hoards. A humble one networks. The proud survive good years and break on the first bad one. The humble are slower, less glamorous, and still standing in March. Taste, surprisingly, is not decoration but reinforcement. Long cures and slow ferments do more than keep death away. They reward patience with flavor. When preservation is delicious, culture carries the method forward, even after famine loosens its grip. This is the most elegant engineering trick of all. Make the resilient option the pleasurable one. Then no sermon is needed. Desire will do the teaching. Ethics here is not abstract. Waste is sin, because it breaks chains in a system that only works as a braid. To throw out fat is to throw out February. To eat seed is to rob April. To take more from the hedgerow than it can forgive is to set next winter's table with apologies. But the ethics cut both ways. The oven's heat is for all. The granary's rules prevent a loud tragedy and 10 quiet ones. The gleaner's hand is a right, not a plea. Compassion is engineered. It is roped to timetables and locks, so it doesn't depend on good moods or generous afternoons. Resilience also loves scale that fits. Local wind makes a drying loft honest. A hillside's geology makes a cellar competent. A river's temperament becomes refrigeration. A cave's breath becomes a cheese school. The principle is to build with constraints rather than against them, shaping tools to landscape and culture instead of importing friction disguised as progress. Uniformity is fragile, mosaics endure. Risk management is everywhere, but it's rarely loud. Redundancy looks like generosity. Extra hooks in the rafters, 2 vents in the cellar, 2 keys for the grain door, a second batch started before the first empties, a herd owned by shares rather than pride. Audit shows up as gossip and ritual. The tally read aloud at the church door, the market scale tested with a standard weight, the oven queue posted and argued into fairness. These are small, calm instruments, but together they hum like a well-tuned loom. There is also a temporal intelligence at work. Techniques are not tasks, they are seasons expressed as behavior. You scald milk when the cow and the weather agree. You salt meat when the air has turned from enemy to accomplice. You ferment when the room is cool enough to sound like a gentle hiss rather than a riot. When accidents rip the calendar, the army arrives, the rain goes on, a sickness takes hands, the famine code steps in with a darker meter. Bark meal, acorns, nettles, leached lichens. It is not romance, it is grace under arithmetic. Let's pause here, take a slow breath, and picture the whole system as a village seen from a hill at dusk. Smoke writing a low script above roofs, a bakehouse door open like a lantern, a granary resting heavy on its stone mushrooms, a path worn between a cellar door and a kitchen, hams and herbs and wheels of cheese in lofts that smell of wood and thyme. Hold it for a beat. This is what resilience looks like when it isn't bragging. How does this philosophy translate forward without cosplay or kitsch? By principles, not replicas. First, build portfolios, not bets. In food, that means multiple preservation modes for every staple you can afford. Salt and smoke, plus dry, plus ferment, plus fat. In life, it means skills across domains, redundant ways to communicate, tools that don't all share a single point of failure. The medieval household is a risk textbook. Jackstraws of small supports, none heroic, all interoperable. Second, choose tools that scale down gracefully. A method you can do alone at dusk is insurance when neighbors are away. A technology that needs a factory dies when a truck gets lost. Clay, wood, stone, and patience are unglamorous, which is part of the point. They survive mood swings in supply. Third, make the resilient option the habitually pleasant one. If your pickles are beautiful, you'll always have some. If your bread keeps by sour, you will feed children tomorrow without a store. Translate that outward. Design routines that feel rewarding even when nothing is wrong, and you will have them when everything is. Fourth, bind compassion to procedure. If generosity needs everyone to be virtuous every day, it will fail on Thursday. If generosity is scheduled, recorded, and protected by mild penalties, it will survive bad tempers and thin months. The medieval village is proof that bureaucracy, at the right scale and for the right purpose, is love wearing a ledger. Fifth, practice failure in small weather. The famine code is muscle memory rehearsed in ordinary scarcity, so that catastrophic scarcity finds you calm and specific. Translate that to drills. Test the cellar in a warm week. Fix the vent. Try a different salt. Write down what went wrong without shame. Beauty matters. A ham can be art. A jar can be a jewel. A loaf can smell like safety. Beauty keeps hands faithful when novelty would otherwise steal them. We often underestimate this. The modern world is full of efficient, ugly solutions that work until the day people stop loving them. The old solutions often made affection part of the mechanism. None of this denies science or progress. Thermometers and pH meters name the thresholds our ancestors felt. Refrigeration is a miracle. Vaccines are civilization's triumph. The point is not to retreat, but to remember trajectories. Technologies that extend what we already know tend to endure. Technologies that replace understanding with dependence tend to fail noisily. Salt will still be salt when the lights flicker. A cellar will still be a stone lung when the compressor sleeps. Education, finally, is the true preservative. Skills stored in one head are a fragile pantry. Skills spread across a street, sung in recipes, and baked into schedules, are durable. Teach children to read a brine the way they read a sky. Teach them that jars talk and cellars breathe. Teach them why the oven has a second life after bread. Make apprenticeships of chores and ceremonies of audits. Knowledge left idle ferments poorly. Knowledge exercised becomes culture. By now, the map we promised in Part 1 is complete. The threads salt and smoke, earth and stone, air and fire, ferments, fats and sweets, the shared systems, the seasonal wheel, the last resort code are braided into a rope thick enough to pull a family across a winter and a village across a bad year. You can tug any strand and the others answer. You can cut one and the rest hold long enough to tie a splice. We close where we began, at the hearth that never quite warms the room, with snow talking to the door and a pot that is more hope than supper. Only now the hope has a shape. On the wall hang tools that are stories. In the cellar, the earth keeps its slow promise. In the rafters, air and memory share the same hooks. In the crocks, invisible allies work without complaint. In the bakehouse, heat will be shared in the morning. The calendar is not an enemy, it is a metronome. The year will always be strange. The answer is to become fluent in its strangeness. Resilience isn't a bunker, it's a neighborhood. It's a household that measures and weights and layers, a village that schedules kindness, a year that carries itself wisely. The lights may dim, the road may flood, the price may rise, and yet the table can still be laid simply, honestly, with food that tastes of patience and cooperation. That is the medieval lesson. Not nostalgia, not fear, but fidelity to what works when the weather is itself. You've just walked through another forgotten corner of the past, not the world of kings or saints, but the quieter country where most of humanity has always lived. The small rooms, the muddy fields, the faith that bends but doesn't break. These are the places where history truly breathes. Here at Poor Historian, we don't chase the noise of glory. We listen for the whispers, the sound of a wooden spoon scraping the last meal from a pot. The hush before a bell tolls the breath of someone still alive after everyone richer has gone. The poor never wrote their stories, so we try to lend them a voice slow and steady, the way truth prefers to travel. If you've stayed this long, perhaps something in those voices found you. Maybe you recognized a little of yourself in their endurance, the quiet act of getting up again, of doing the work that no one will ever sing about. That's what this channel exists for, to remind us that survival is not small, that dignity can live in the dirt, and that memory is the gentlest kind of rebellion. Take a moment before you go. Let the sound of their world fade but not vanish. Picture the candlelight softening the corners of a cottage, or the hush that follows when the last tool is put away. Those lives are long gone, but their echoes are patient. They wait for anyone willing to listen without hurry. If you want to keep walking these narrow paths of the past, the ones that smell of smoke, sweat, and stories, you can help them stay lit. Subscribe to Poor Historian and let history find you when the world gets too loud. Leave a comment if a scene or a sentence stayed with you. That's how we keep these voices alive. And if this journey brought you a little calm, a little wonder, or just a better kind of silence, share it. Someone else might need that stillness too. There are more lives waiting here. Peasants, healers, builders, soldiers, mothers, ordinary souls who made the Middle Ages anything but dull. Their stories don't demand attention, they earn it. Each one is another piece of the great mosaic of how we got here, not through brilliance or conquest, but through persistence. So as you close your eyes or drift into sleep, remember this history isn't only what was written, it's what was endured. And somewhere, in the dust between centuries, the poor are still telling their stories, softly, stubbornly, gratefully, to anyone willing to listen. Thanks for listening, for remembering, and for keeping company with the forgotten. We'll meet again in the next quiet story.